Okay, looks like we still have some folks trickling in, but we'll go ahead and get started. Hi, everybody. My name is Tessa O'Connell. I'm the Communications and Public Outreach Manager at the Natural Areas Conservancy, the host of this event today, The Power of Access. I'm joined by some really wonderful guest speakers, which we will introduce in a minute. I just wanted to get on here and give the quick welcoming remarks and housekeeping notes. So this is Zoom webinar. I think we're all pretty familiar with it at this point. Any questions you might have throughout the program, feel free to put that in the chat and we will do our best to get to it. We have a Q&A session at the end of the event. Also, feel free to introduce yourself in the chat. I see a couple of folks have already started doing that. We love to hear from you and see where you're coming in from. So feel free to say hello there. And finally, I just want to thank Con Edison for sponsoring this event. Throughout 2021, the NAC has been able to host about 5 virtual events, all due to Con Edison funding that they graciously awarded us. So we're always so grateful for their support. And even though this is the last virtual event of 2021, we will definitely plan some exciting programming for 2022. So feel free to check back at the Natural Areas website in the new year to see what we have going on, and we hope you'll join us again for even more programming. So with that, I will turn the event over to Josh, and I will see you all in the chat. Have a wonderful event. Thanks, everybody.
Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Josh Otero. I'm the Trails Community Engagement Coordinator at the Natural Areas Conservancy. I'm joined here today by Angel, Giselle, and Renzo, who will introduce themselves more formally shortly. And we're going to be speaking about the work that they all do here in New York City with regards to providing access for their communities to natural areas. Just for those of you who may not know, the Natural Areas Conservancy is a nonprofit partner of New York City Parks. We help to manage and restore 10,000 acres of forest and wetlands since 2012. And I work as a member of the citywide trails team. And we're still in the process of formalizing the citywide trail system. There's natural areas in over 75 parks, and we formalized over 40 miles of trails in 19 parks citywide since 2017. And this number has actually changed and continues to increase. So providing access for people to be able to enjoy natural areas. I'm gonna hand it over to Angel to speak a little bit about what's going on in the Greenbelt.
Hi, thank you so much, Josh, and everyone at the Natural Areas Conservancy for having me and the Greenbelt Conservancy in New York City Parks represented on this panel. I am so excited. I am an environmental educator with New York City Parks working out of the Greenbelt on Staten Island. Is now the time for slides? Okay, cool. So basically the Greenbelt is a 2,800 acre woodland and park system that is, it's the Conservancy that works in partnership with New York City Parks. So we all kind of have our different roles and parts to play when it comes to managing, promoting, and sustaining all of these acres and our 35 miles of trails. The Greenbelt Conservancy began in 1989, but High Rock Park, which is one of the flagship parks here in the Greenbelt, was dedicated in the 60s after a huge, amazing fight to save the woodlands and the areas here. And year after year, we have accumulated more and more space and saved it from development throughout Staten Island, which, as we all know, is an issue on this island and throughout New York City. So every single bit of green space that we can save is worth putting in all of the effort that we do. On one of the slides there is a picture. I can't really see the system, so I'm not sure exactly what's going on. But there is a picture of me in 1995 here in High Rock Park, planting a tree with I think it was my 3rd grade class. And that slide just kind of shows you exactly what access means, right? Because I searched for that picture because I had this really amazing recollection of coming here with my class. And I'm from the North Shore of Staten Island. You know, I was raised by a single mom, pretty poor family, not many opportunities. And it took somebody making it important to them to bring my class and my school and my people from far away into this green space to, you know, show us the benefits and welcome us into the natural world that the Greenbelt is. And the Greenbelt is, we're part of the borough of Park, so it's really important here. And so then you can see me in 2021 planting another tree in partnership with Natural Areas Conservancy and Madison Square Park Conservancy with the myelin ghost forest planting. And one thing led directly to the other. And so what we're doing here today is we're making sure that we are planting the seeds in the children of today on Staten Island and throughout all of the 5 boroughs, bringing them here. Children, adolescents, adults, all manner of people, all walks of life, welcome here. And so what we're doing is actively engaging all populations and reaching out our hands to everyone and working hard to make 2021, 2022, and every year following, make this space more accessible to everyone through each and every one of our efforts. So thank you again for having us. And also big thanks to Con Ed from us as well. Con Ed and our other funders also make everything here possible. And so we appreciate all that we're able to provide for people with that funding. So thank you so much again, Josh.
Thank you. And one thing I did forget to mention is, if we can, as we're introducing ourselves, make mention of one of our signature community or nature programs. So do you want to make mention of one of yours right now, Angel?
Absolutely. I just had a nice meeting with my coworker here about our 2022 year, specifically talking about the Greenbelt Conservation Corps, which is a program that we have created, and it's not quite in its infancy yet anymore because we are in a new year and we're planning big projects for next year and years following. And it's basically a program where we are focusing on conservation, education, stewardship, and community. And we are focusing really, really hard to make sure that each one of those pillars is present in everything that we do, while simultaneously and at the very same time building trails, making sure they're safe and accessible physically for people, but then also building those networks of like the pathways of community and networking. And that includes funders, that includes participants, that includes everybody under the sun. So the Greenbelt Conservation Corps aims to reach everyone and bring them into the Greenbelt. So thank you.
Thank you. All right, Giselle, we're going to kick it over to you.
Awesome. Thanks, Josh. And thanks, Angel, for that. Hi, everyone. My name is Giselle Herrera, and I am RISE's Youth Development Program Manager over in the Rockaways, as you can see on this image here. RISE is an acronym for the nonprofit organization, which stands for Rockaway Initiative for Sustainability and Equity, and which gives you an idea of what our organization is all about. So our mission is to inspire all generations of Rockaway residents to care for their environment and their community. And our mission is to really have all walks of life across Rockaway, across this 11-mile stretch of peninsula, to really connect not only with others, but also with the land. So as you can see here, well, actually, before I do that, in the chat, if you could, all of the attendees, let me know if you have been to Rockaway, and if so, how long ago you have been to Rockaway, because I know for a lot of people, it is a bit of a hike. It is a bit of a trek to get out to Rockaway, especially by subway. You have to take the A all the way down. But I'd love to hear in the chat, and I'll take a look at that in a bit, how recently a lot of you have been to Rockaway. So yeah, summer of 2020. So it's a beautiful place. 3 years ago, yeah, it's a beautiful place. You get the connection to the city, but also the bay and the beach. And as you can see from this map here, you have such a diversity of wildlife in Rockaway as well. You have in the bay, you know, horseshoe crabs, diamondback terrapins, and such like ubiquitous flora and fauna that in Rockaway, you definitely think of immediately, but from the outside, you might not think of, like humpback whales, piping plovers. So because of this ecologically unique part of New York City that is often looked over or historically and definitely historically disenfranchised by the community, Jean Dupont, the executive director of RISE, made it a point to have an organization that highlights just the natural beauty of Rockaway in all of its facets. And it is such an important ecosystem, as I'm sure a lot of you know, based on the bay, the beach, the dunes, all of these important places to the New York City natural areas. And then you see, of course, RISE in that, well, you can't see it from this angle, but in the pink circle there, that's where our building is situated along the peninsula. But Josh, if you can turn it over to the next slide. In this slide, though, you can see not only is Rockaway an ecologically unique part of New York City, it's also a socially unique part of New York City as well. And you can see that in the demographic breakdown of the peninsula. So over on the east side, you see by these different colored dots, the resolution might not be ideal, but you can see the key on the lower right. Green, red, and yellowish orange dots representing those populations of color, more aggregating towards the east, but then on the west, much more white population. So there is a divide we're seeing both in neighborhoods, populations, and resources that can be found just on this 11-mile stretch of peninsula. But we really, at RISE, make it a point to be that space where all members of the community, all walks of life, all areas of the peninsula can come together and learn more about this vibrant coastal community. In my area of the organization with our youth programs, it's a lot of fun because we get to kind of open the eyes to a lot of students of the beautiful natural areas that are found in Rockaway, whether it's camping in Floyd Bennett Field, planting some beach grasses along the beach, surfing, and kayaking in the bay. You know, there's so much beauty in Rockaway that as residents, maybe it's not kind of immediately noticeable. So it's such a pleasure in my role to do that with these students and explore all these amazing natural areas of Rockaway. So, and foster that stewardship, foster that connection, whether it's just, you know, a day surfing on Rockaway Beach or a little bit more long-term while doing research about, you know, the importance of these grasses in especially like highly eroded areas. So that's a little bit about myself. I'm really excited to talk more about Rockaway, especially as a lot of you have mentioned you have been there, or it's been some time that you've been there. I'm excited to tell you a little bit more about what we do and in my role, how we involve our youth in those really exciting opportunities. So thank you all so much, and I'm looking forward to your questions.
Thank you. And now we're going to take a trip on the A train uptown from Rockaway to WordUp. Renzo.
All right. Well, hello, everybody. My name is Renzo Moyano. And before I start, just want to say that it's funny because the last time I was in Rockaway was probably, I think I've only been there once, to Floyd Bennett Field for like a night run. And that was like maybe like 4 or 5 years ago. And I've never been to Staten Island, which is on my to-do list actually by the end of this year, because I was like, you know, the only borough I've never been to. And I assume that for many New Yorkers, that's the case. So I'm glad that, Josh, that you got people from these two regions that are so rich, but because they're not right in the center, you know, kind of like in the margins. So it's cool to have it all in one panel. That's awesome. But yes, my name is Renzo Moyano, and I'm here on behalf of WordUp Community Bookshop, located in Washington Heights. I myself am from Uptown. I grew up in Inwood, was raised in Inwood, am now in Washington Heights, and I'm able to work in my community with one of these, to me, vanguard projects that came onto its own, all fueled by the community itself. We started off, established 2011. So this year we celebrated our 10th year anniversary. And what started off as a pop-up shop, because Uptown, we really didn't have any bookshops up here for a long while. And so in order to, as a reaction to that, that real demand, WordUp popped up in 2011. And although it was only supposed to be temporary, the community didn't want it to go. And so the community, there was a huge effort, collective effort to influence politicians and representatives to then influence the landowner, to the landlord to give us an extension. And then when that didn't work out, we ended up through crowdfunding, raising enough funds to open the location that we're currently at right now, which is on 165th Street and Amsterdam Avenue. So we've been there since 2013. And now it's gotten to the point where there's this secondary location, kind of like started off unofficial, very WordUp. And it's this huge location that's 10 times as big as like our store in Amsterdam. And right now we're like making a lot of miracles happen to update that and open that up officially, even more so than it is now, because it's still kind of unofficial underground. If you know about it, you know. If you don't, you don't. But yeah, that's a little bit of like word. And what started off as a bookshop has now become a general community space where community members can go in and request the space for whatever activity they want. We have many, up and coming authors, self-published authors who come and want to do an event at the store. We do book clubs. We do, well, things have changed since the pandemic, but we've always done, for the most part, open mics, workshops, classes, panel discussions. We do story time, book launches, book signings, again, book clubs for different ages. And now for the first time, which is what brings me to this event and this panel in particular, is that now for the first time we have our first official in-house summer program and fall and spring after school programs that are heavily ecologically based. I am an anthropology and environmental studies major and minor. And so when I was told that we wanted to, at WordUp, that we wanted to start up our own, youth programming, summer and after school programs, I was very excited to push a very cultural and ecological studies heavy program for the children. And if we could go to the next slide, please, Josh. So I created, helped to mold what became the Earth Defenders Initiative, or the Earth Defenders Program. Started off as a summer program where we split up the entire program into 4 sections, which were food. So everything from like, what is it that we're growing? How are we growing it? How does it get here? The whole process, food justice, food access, speaking of accessibility. And we always try to partner up with a community group that is working in that field. So in this case, we partnered up with the People's Fridge, and we had the children witness, like, what happens if food just blindly goes to waste, and how can we intervene to make the system more efficient and respect the cycles. The second week was all about Indigenous history and sovereignty. I personally am really big on history, and specifically Indigenous and Native history, not just because of my personal life, but also because I think uptown, where I grew up and where WordUp is located, it has so much rich Lenape history and also African American history. Here we have we have a bunch of sites that are right now being studied, and discussions on how we're going to honor those sites, different Lenape sacred sites, and even African burial sites. And so up here, there's so much history, and that's the Lenape history. On top of that, there's a whole layer of ecological unique features to Uptown that for some reason is not really, I don't know, it's not really disseminated for many reasons. There's language barriers, there's cultural barriers, but there's a lot here culturally and ecologically that can strengthen, you know, these children's educations, and parks and the natural spaces are a huge part of that. And so we're super lucky uptown to have these beautiful, majestic, rustic old parks like Inwood, or like majestic in another way, more manicured, but very beautiful, like Fort Tryon. And then we have Highbridge, which actually is the closest park to us, and the park that, in my opinion, needs a lot of love. And hopefully it's something that Josh and I and Natural Areas and New York City Parks can keep working on. But we'll talk about that a little later. That's all.
Thank you. Thank you all. So now that you all got to meet the panelists who we have here for this discussion, we're going to get into it. And if you're inspired or have any thoughts or suggestions, questions, you can put them in the chat, put them in the Q&A. Some of them we'll try to address in real time, and whatever we don't get to, there's a portion of time at the end that we'll try to get to everything that we can. So in the meanwhile, I will stop sharing my screen so I can see everybody's faces. Nice. I guess before we jump in, if you could give a quick response to this question, Renzo, or you could even type the answer in the chat if you'd like, the 2 locations for the community bookshops for people that might be interested in visiting.
Yeah, I will type that in the chat.
Thank you, sir. And we're gonna, I think, just start from the top of what we did for introductions for our first just general question. And again, y'all already know this is discussion, so you know, you got a thought or something, could go. Otherwise, we'll just go in the order that we had gone in prior. So our first question is, how do you define accessibility? And what is your vision for improved accessibility in your neighborhood parks? So Angel, for you first.
Sure thing. I was just inspired by what both Giselle and Renzo said, and wrote down a few notes. And I really liked how Renzo mentioned cultural barriers, language barriers. You know, access is not just something that, you know, I could look at it from a parks perspective as a very physical kind of thing. Like, can somebody get to the park? Which is a major access barrier, potentially. But there are so many things beyond that, that it really requires like a broadening of your lens to really think about the world from a different pair of eyes than your own, to really think about what kind of barriers there might be, you know. So access basically to parks or to, you know, anything that we're talking about is just, you know, the general population being able to benefit from like a system that exists that other people are able to benefit from. In parks, there's so much like to benefit from. There's, you know, mental health things that, like, when I go for a walk out and like out of my office building in High Rock Park, I feel better immediately. You know, if I'm stressed out, I go for a walk, I get fresh air, I get some bird songs, I get the sound of, you know, leaves beneath my feet. And those things, like just in like an auditory kind of way, are really beneficial to me. But you know what, if I flip that for a second and thought about a person who is blind, or a person who is deaf, or a person who can't walk on, you know, this difficult trail, then I start opening up my mind and my perception to think about what access to this park space looks like for more people than just myself or, you know, a different set of privileged people. So thank you for saying that earlier, Renzo. That really kind of set it right on the nose.
Yeah, and to go off, Angel, what you're saying about just this like widening of like audiences of just people in nature. I mean, it just, accessibility to me just means to be more equitable, of course, like in the most literal sense, like to have it be equal to all. And personally, from my experience in Rockaway, I've been here for 2 years now, and close to 2 years, and it is pretty drastic. And as I mentioned in that slide before, just the difference in just like neighborhoods across the peninsula, if we were to just look at like census data, of course, but then what does that really translate to? And that is resources, that is, and in this kind of conversation of parks is how parks are maintained, how accessible they are, like how easily they are to get to. And I mean, to think of something off the top of my, like right behind us with Rockaway Beach, in certain areas of the peninsula, lifeguards are found pretty regularly. And, you know, that of course helps people feel safer, feeling like they can, you know, experience nature and be a part of the water, and or the dunes, not on the dunes, but near the dunes to explore. And if you were to go towards the east side of the peninsula, lifeguards are few and far between. Of course, there's a need for them, maybe not now, but I think it's just these resources that are needed, at least in Rockaway, to help with that accessibility, to help with people feel safe, and really like facilitate that connection with these green spaces. So I think that's one really big thing that comes to mind when it comes to accessibility in Rockaway.
Mm-hmm. As for Uptown, I remember, for example, going to Inwood Hill Park. I mean, you know, lucky enough that I grew up being able to bilingual, right? Growing up bilingual, which was, you know, is a big thing when there is a very clear cultural and linguistic gap that exists up here in tiny Uptown, where there is no east side, it's all west side. But even so, Broadway is definitely a dividing line, you know, in terms of race and class and language. And so when, you know, when you go into Inwood Hill Park, things are changing now, but still, it's still not, everything is in English for the most part, or most things are in English. But when I remember growing up, I would go into Inwood Hill Park, and there were two kind of like informational, I don't know, like boards, like info boards that talked about the park and its unique qualities. And I was just fascinated, right? Because I was reading this stuff. My parents don't speak English, don't read English, so they never told me, and no one ever told them. So I started reading about how like we have the most accessible salt marsh, like in the city, just right there. Or like, you know, the oldest, you know, trees and forests left in Manhattan, or the fact that Manhattan comes from Manahata, which is Lenape, which means, you know, mountainous or hilly islands, which is, I thought was really funny because that's the same thing that Haiti means in Taino. And it also happens that this is like the biggest Dominican, you know, diaspora. It was just so many connections. And I was like, oh my God, like, why don't we talk about this? Or the fact that like my elementary school was called the Shirakapak School. And Shirakapak is like one of the original village names, and can be, maybe many can argue, is like the indigenous Lenape name for like Uptown, Shirakapak, which is cool. So I'm just like, why are we not talking about this? And it's because there is no, you know, all of that was in English. So unless you spoke English or were bilingual, then, you know, you just didn't know about that stuff. So, you know, like my Dominican neighbors, like monolingual Dominican neighbors, you know, we'd be chilling by the salt marsh, but like they would look at it and they'd be like, it's ugly sometimes, you know, because like there was no water, so it looked really muddy. But like, had they understood that it was a salt marsh, just the perspective changes. It's not no longer like, oh, it's like a dry, muddy thing. No, it's a salt marsh and it breathes. And I don't know, it's just those things, they build up. And those little things are actually huge. Or the fact that the only mention of the Lenape people in all of Inwood Hill Park is like this placard that basically follows the very whitewashed history of Peter Minuit and how amazing he was for buying the whole island for a few bucks or a few whatever. And it's just like, if that tells a story, and that also creates kind of like a layer, like a block there of accessibility of, or like, well, what kind of stories are we telling? What languages are we telling them in? If we know that Uptown, a huge percentage of it are Spanish speakers, then wouldn't that, be incorporated into public spaces like the parks? That's just one. I mean, and it goes from that to all the way to like in Highbridge right now, where I originally wanted to take the kids and incorporate some plant IDs, invasives removal, trash collecting. I couldn't even do that because the state of the trail itself is so, there's so much glass there. There's needles. In order to get to that place, there has to be many other systemic issues at play that have to also be addressed at the same time in order for this place to be an ecological classroom, because it's a beautiful trail. You can learn a lot from it, a lot of geology, a lot of ecology, and like I said, indigenous Lenape history. But we need to make sure that we also know what we're doing and how we're housing our poor, how we're housing our homeless, what we're doing with helping against drug addiction, like real help, not pushing people away or making them feel that the parks is their last sanctuary, because that's also not, assume that's not healthy for anybody. So it's a spectrum, accessibility wise.
That was a really good way to end it, because it connected to Chris's question, which I hope we do have time to get to in the Q&A, which is like, what are we talking about when we speak about accessibility? And I feel like each of you just hit on so many different points of what accessibility is. It's really like, you have to really work to be more understanding of everything when trying to make areas more accessible. So y'all all just thank you for shedding light on those different aspects of it. My next question for you all is one that it can relate to what you just described in accessibility and some of the issues you've seen. You all gave pretty site-specific examples. And again, we can start from the top, and then maybe I'll get a little funky with the order after. I don't know yet. So let's, Angel, start with you. And if you can, describe a recent success and explain how that success was measured. And how did you reach your goals?
Well, I feel like we have so many different like evolving goals, and I just related so much to everything that Renzo was saying. Like, there are so many different layers to have to reach, but like, how do you reach this layer if like you got to get here a little bit before you get, it's like a totally all-inclusive, like holistic dynamic that has to be addressed. So we've reached quite a few goals for accessibility. We're talking about a really special last year and a half, right, where everything was completely different. So accessibility and reaching those goals looks very different now than maybe the goals of 10 years ago were. With the pandemic, it just like did some really, really funky stuff here, as we all know. And so one or a few things that we did to absolutely increase accessibility to the Greenbelt, which has some real barriers to access, physical and psychological and like all different sorts of ways. But what we definitely did is we started in a very physical way. We reblazed all 35 miles of trails here. We have, I think, 7 or 8 different color trails, and went through every single one, every single segment, and made sure that it matched the map that we had. And that may sound like not a huge deal to some people, but I think that's like somebody looking at it through their lens of access. They're like, oh, why is that a big deal? But it is a big deal to somebody who maybe isn't so comfortable in, 2,800 acres of woodland, maybe doesn't really know how to read a map so well, maybe isn't super comfortable calling for help if they get lost, didn't drive there and needs to find public transportation, needs to really know like how to get in and out, needs to know where a bathroom is, like these things are just very basic things that can be very easily overlooked. So when we reblazed all the trails, it was like, we knew that it was a really big deal, but we also I didn't personally expect to encounter so many people on the trails that say, hey, wow, thank you so much for doing this. People really appreciated it. And so my expectation, as we saw, an absolute boom in all of the people who came to visit parks because they were the only places that were safe, for people to feel like they were able to go out there and be safe from COVID and, still be doing something positive for themselves and their families, learning something and spending quality time together. We saw way more people on the trails. And we also knew that we were making a positive impact by helping them navigate them. So then the other part of that is starting the Greenbelt Conservation Corps in the last year and a half, and that being a really important component of access to these parks, because as you know, Josh, we've gone through so many different parts of our park system and identified, hazards or parts where it doesn't match the trail map, or areas where there are other, inconsistencies or areas that just could use some enhancement. And that goes right into the mission of the Greenbelt Conservancy, which is what we're doing year after year. We are improving, and hopefully we're improving the trail system physically so that people aren't tripping on rocks and roots, and there aren't trees that are hazards potentially falling on people. Like that is a huge part of our job. So we are welcoming people in and having, teaching them in a very service-based kind of way, about their natural environment, and showing them how to assess the landscape, look around, see, what do you notice? And really asking questions and letting people kind of answer their own curiosities and let them ponder, like, what am I looking at? Does this look like a good situation? Is this bridge strong enough for 20 people to walk across? Things like that, where again, some people may take that for granted, but those are real things that if somebody isn't super comfortable going into a park in the first place, that they can't see the street or hear the cars from, then if they encounter something like that, that's a surefire way to lose a bunch of people who we want to be able to benefit from the fresh air and the mental and physical health benefits of being out here. So the reblazing of the trails, the inception of the Greenbelt Conservation Corps, and then also as we're on Zoom right now and connecting to people all throughout the city and interagency kind of way, we also just completely switched to virtual, out of nowhere. We didn't know what we were doing, and we were like, we still need to access people and give them a quality program, teach them about invasive species, teach them about the hazards that you might encounter here so that they're prepared, like ticks or poison ivy or things like that. Teach them about winter weather clothing selections so that they know how to dress, so that they come prepared and ready for what they're going to encounter here. So the last year and a half has been a huge learning, the learning curve has been incredible. We've been able to offer about 125 different virtual programs to people that we didn't think that we were capable of doing. And it goes on, now we realize that in that space during the pandemic, there were people that we were able to access that we still can't access because they traditionally can't even make it to a park anyway. So we're going to keep up on virtual so that everyone can still have their foot in the park, whether they can get here or not.
Thank you, Angel. So I apologize to Zell and Renzo, but I would like to make sure that we get into the more program specific questions that we have situated. So I'm gonna begin with you, Giselle. RISE has a variety of environmentally focused community initiatives that span from art installations to community visioning projects. I got to participate in a few of those and they were really great. Environmental education for community residents. How have all of these different avenues of engagement enhanced access to natural spaces in the Rockaways?
Awesome. Yeah, thanks, Josh. So like I mentioned earlier, Rockaway, and as many of you already know, is such an ecologically unique part of New York City. And to the residents and community members that live here, I think there is often a disconnect in, you know, as many of us, you know, growing up, maybe where we live, it's, we have kind of maybe our blinders on to these areas that we're so used to. And I think what RISE does really well is highlighting these different fields and always tying it back to just how unique Rockaway is. So to your point, Josh, about art installations, we've been really lucky to have a lot of great local artists sharing their photos in exhibits in our building that highlight the kind of twists and turns when it comes to urban renewal and, you know, what that really means in Rockaway and how much kind of the community has been in limbo in that way with the use of land, using, you know, water bottles collected off of Rockaway Beach and having that be the start of a conversation of, okay, how are we really going to take care and protect of these natural areas in my area, in my backyard. And in our youth programs, whether it's kayaking out in Jamaica Bay, doing some bird watching at the Piping Plover Sanctuary, all of these activities start up a conversation and really kind of hopefully, and I think so, take off those blinders of like really opening up a conversation in a whole new world of beauty, natural beauty that is in Rockaway. And that's also seen like in community efforts with our Greater Rockaway Shoreline Enhancement Plan. That was a big success of ours, and bringing in so many different areas of the community, the elderly, youth, different areas of Rockaway, east, west, and having professionals really help facilitate that conversation of how do we protect our dunes, not only for the threat of erosion and sea level rise that is imminent and unfortunately very drastic in Rockaway with flooding, to, you know, the intrinsic aspects of like for wildlife and protecting that for those areas. So we definitely have many areas that we focus on, but it always comes back to, you know, having that conversation of the importance of these green spaces in Rockaway. And it's always a pleasure to see how what might be not connected or almost disjunct actually have a really nice connection to always back to the land, always back to Rockaway.
Thank you. And Renzo, we're going to shift over to you. If you can, like in about make it about 5 minutes, if you can capture your response in that time. What is covered in you mentioned this a little bit in your description of the program, but what is covered in the curriculum for the Earth Defenders program? And how does this curriculum enhance participants' access to nature?
Gotcha. Yeah, so I was able to mention the first half of the program, which was food, indigenous history and sovereignty. We also, and for that, we explored on more than one occasion, but Josh was there for one of them. We explored Inwood Hill Park and the region of Shirakapak. Also afterwards, we had our neighborhood, in which we talked about and basically taught about the Audubon mural project, which is really cool, artistic mural project in all throughout the Heights, highlighting beautiful bird species, and as well as like learning about the unique ecological features that I mentioned before, like the salt marsh or Fordham gneiss, or, you know, learning about Manhattan schist or Inwood marble, just what you know, names, place names. That was a big part of, you know, toponyms, a big part of our neighborhood. Like we learned about Amsterdam Avenue and why it's called Amsterdam Avenue, or why Washington Heights is called Washington Heights. And then the last week of the last section, sorry, of the program was the climate emergency, right? So we learned about what happened. We took a case study learning about what happened at our recirculation location that got flooded during one of those really intense rains that we got this year. And we also, throughout the whole program, we were reading sections of a book called One Earth, People of Color Protecting Our Planet. And so for the last day of the program, we surprised the kids with a virtual visit from the author herself, Anuradha Rao. And we had a whole, we had the author there. And so the kids were able to ask all the questions that they had that they didn't know they'd be able to ask the author. That was really cool. And so now that summer program we've expanded upon it. And although we have chosen to go full virtual now, this program was a hybrid program where it was, one day virtual, one day in person. Now it's become fully virtual, but because of that, we've also been able to expand it and do more than one program with multiple age groups, which is cool that we can offer that now. Yeah, and as for your second question, what have I found most rewarding in working with the youth? Well, the fact that I'm working with the youth, I think that in itself is super rewarding, because as someone who is just turned 29, in my late 20s, my final 20s, I feel like this is the time. I don't know. I feel like, I'm very different, or I'm different than, my parents. My parents are amazing, but just in the sense of like envisioning a more radical, and by radical, I mean that in the best sense. I mean that in like getting to the root of issues. If we're dealing with something like the climate emergency, it's because it's radical, right? Like it's I forgot where I heard this, but someone was talking about like climate change and, capitalism and all of the social ills that we face, like, are part of this omni crisis, right? This, like, it's just all happening at the same time. And I believe, and I don't think I'm the only one, but that when you get to the root cause of many of our social issues, they're all ecologically based. It's like land, food, shelter, clean air, clean food. And so just working with children, I think, is one of the most powerful things I feel I can do, because on top of like this, like ecological literacy, I guess, if you want to call it, or ecological know-how, like my goal with these kids long term is for them, in a very, like, essentially, it's like for them to be more mammal. I don't know, because, like, for them to remember that, like, they are part of the animal kingdom, that we need to recognize and abide by, like, nature's laws, and also just, like, learn about the land, but like, under our feet, because I feel like we are so disconnected that, like, many people don't know that, Manhattan is a Lenape name, or like just very big things. And even the little things, like what species that tree is, or that one. So my goal with the kids is, like, to help them develop this ecological and cultural literacy that I feel like it took me up till my 20s to get to this point. But, like, if these kids just, like, have those positive experiences, they can get there much faster, or they can just become, and the kids say, like, the most amazing things. And it's beautiful, because it provides me with purpose, but also at the same time, like, hope, because then, it's dealing with all of these things. Like, you have, like, something that I was talking to Josh recently, like, you have to have, like, a good sense of humor about things, because it can drive you either, like, to depression, or just sorrow, or just you give up hope. But working with these kids gives me hope that they can get there much faster than even I did.
And as a quick like addition to that, with myself working with our high school shore corps group, and, like, thinking about how I was like at their age in high school, I mean, they're so just like civically active. They're so engaged. They're so just like cool and thoughtful and so like forward thinking and active, that it's like, because of the environment that they're in, because of, you know, the climate crisis and erosion and flooding, it's a very dynamic place to live. And you know, it's just so inspiring, yeah, to mirror what you're saying, Renzo, and to reflect on myself. And like, very much so, like, I'm here and I'm excited and happy to be working with youth, you know, of all ages, or of that age range, and just like really help them to connect. And I learned from them as well. It's very much a reciprocal, symbiotic relationship there. So it's
And
it's
yeah, and when you're
Awesome.
young, like those
Sorry,
experiences you
I'm
have.
sorry to discontinue the discussion, but I do want to make sure we get to the question for Angel. It's what happens when you have a group full of passionate people, and we that's another thing that connects all of our organizations, is the youth engagement that we all engage in. So Angel, I'd like to ask you, where do you hope to see the Greenbelt in 10 years in terms of meeting their mission and improving access to the park system?
Well, I feel like in the chat, I've been following the chat and I haven't been able to respond, but I've seen that my coworker, Chris Ricker, has helped in responding, that one of the main issues and barriers to access here in the Greenbelt is very clear and very simple. And it's been talked about here, and we dealt with it, or we heard people talk about it at Outreach the other day, that transportation is really difficult here. And Renzo, you had talked about earlier, kind of like this line that separates like a socioeconomic space of where you are. We have the very same line, but it's a horizontal kind of line. And it was put in place by Robert Moses, who is, you know, memorialized in Mount Moses here on Staten Island, which is a pile of rubble from his failed Richmond Parkway that has become its own kind of ecosystem. And it's like a really beautiful nudge at him and what he did and what he tried to do and what he succeeded in doing, and like, you know, separating people within the city and creating this like tension, right? Where I grew up on the North Shore and I couldn't get here at all. You know, there are people right now in the chat talking about the fact that, you know, it's dangerous potentially to be standing at a bus stop on a really busy street in high traffic areas. And that there's more that could be done in the partnership between New York City Parks, the DOT, the MTA. You know, it's a full spectrum kind of thing, where it's not just like, what can I do as an environmental educator to make people feel more comfortable here? Because I'll do every single thing that I within my power, but my power and our collective power here in this building can only go so far. So it's really building and honing and nurturing those relationships. And that's why I'm so happy to be here, because I'm hearing from both of you and I'm really inspired by both of you. And I think, like, you know, as you're talking, I'm thinking about how can we partner with Renzo in a book reading? Like, how can we do more stuff with Rockaway Beach and RISE? Like, how can we build those connections and those relationships so that now we're all on the same page, we're all fighting for the same exact thing. And like you just said, it all comes down to and is reduced down to the simplest thing, which is environmental justice. And that is exactly what it is. And it goes, you know, without saying that, you know, on Staten Island, I'm right now in a forever wild space where, you know, no one's going to build, but that's because activists in the 60s made sure that was going to happen. But what's happening right now on the North Shore is that a BJ's is being built in, you know, green space that it was just too little too late to try to fight for it, even though lots of people were mobilized and really passionate and like got young people using social media, like using the resources and the tools that they have. You know, I would like to see in 10 years, the Greenbelt, you know, really become more a part of the fabric of like all of Staten Islanders' lives, you know, to the point where everybody, no matter where you are, whether this is your part of your backyard or you're trekking here from the Bronx, that like people feel comfortable here and that they feel welcome and that there's a space that they can see themselves reflected here. So in my opinion, that looks like, you know, welcoming people to programs, of course. making trails accessible, absolutely. But it also looks like diversifying the workforce and having representation on, you know, the board of directors, where there are more people at the table speaking for their own communities. Because I can sit here and guess all day, like what a different community that I'm not a part of needs, but that's just a guess. And an educated one at that, potentially, you know, I may have some information, but I don't have a lived experience. So it's really welcoming everyone to the table so that we are all building partnerships and growing together, because we have major things to accomplish together. And it quite literally is like saving the planet. Like, I see it very clearly that way. And like, with our powers combined, we can do that, but we have to be in concert with each other. And so like 10 years from now, I hope that we've figured it out, so that everyone feels like they're coming here and learning exactly why we have to protect every single green space, not just 2,800 acres, but, you know, the waterfront parks as well, you know, make them accessible to everyone, and so everyone feels safe. And like Giselle said earlier, you know, some parts of the beach don't have lifeguards, and that makes people feel really uncomfortable. And that could also be like lights, right? Maybe there's no light in that parking lot, and people don't want to park there. So they're not going to go and benefit from that green space. And it comes down to something so simple, and at the same time, something huge, where we need to get a new bus route. We need to get more sidewalks. We have so much work to do. So basically, I just hope to be able to be a part of inspiring people to get here. Maybe we have to get to them so that we can all be on the same page.
I'd say you're already part of that, Angel. Yeah, and again, I just want to say thank you to all of you for being here today. I want to hit you all with a quick lightning round question, like 2 sentences. But before I do want to again just say thank you to everyone who's in attendance right now for joining us during this conversation, for the great questions. We've answered all the questions that we could in the Q&A. There's been a really good discussion in the chat, so thank you all again for that. This is a hard question to answer just because it's so quick, but if you could wave, and I'll start it off, if you could wave a magic wand right now for nature access in New York City, what would you hope to accomplish? And it's kind of connected to the mammal thing that Renzo was talking about. I just want everybody to be connected and know that there's really good medicine out there in our natural areas for us to just enjoy. And that goes from like what can nourish us, even though we're not going to be eating that out here, but what can nourish us all the way around. So let's go reverse order of how we started. Renzo, kick us off with this last.
All right, well, going with my push for linguistic justice, I think one way to make sure that everyone feels included is speak their language. Speak their language, and also like recognize what the land is, you know, who it originally belonged to, because just because things are different now doesn't mean that history is erased. And yeah, that's what, so like if everything could be somehow in like mad different languages, that would be awesome.
Right on. And Giselle?
Yeah, I think if a huge spotlight could just be shown on Rockaway, that would be ideal, because there is so much that people don't know about Rockaway, and whether it's flooding, transportation inequity, just general resource and food justice, all the amazing endemic species that live here. I think just more eyes on Rockaway would be fantastic. And then again, that conversation really gets going. So hopefully that will be happening after today.
Hopefully. Angel?
I think my magic wand would have to do with inspiring and offering the skills to the next generation and 7 generations, as is customary within Native American cultures, to make sure that you're taking care of the next 7 generations of activists and, you know, anthropologists and zoologists and naturalists and botanists, and give them the knowledge and the information, but also like the passion, which they usually already have, but really like that confidence to become an activist, to draw on every single resource that you have, and make sure that you are doing what our matron of High Rock Park, Greta Moulton, did in the 60s, and really like, you know, talk to politicians and, you know, start to try to learn how to speak their language also, right? It goes both ways, you know, use people and their knowledge and their skills get it all together so that we're all one big package and able to really advocate for ourselves and for our neighbors and our community, and really care about each other and about our environment. And that's pretty much it.
Home. So thank you again, everyone who is here. Thank you, Giselle. Thank you, Renzo. Thank you, Angel. That was an amazing discussion. Thank you all who attended, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your day and have a good holiday.
Thank you so much.
Drinks, yeah.